So I'm the sub this week, and for those of us that are visiting, I'm going to share a number of different things. Specifically, I'm going to share for Michael this idea with literacy, an ongoing theme of reading, literacy, that development, and digital solutions. And honestly, I don't know how we talk about reading without digital technologies in today's world, where most of our students will have access to a device, if not their own device, and those devices are increasingly offering lots of different things when it comes to literacy. But to get things started, I always like to kind of think about the learners we're working with and always connect to that. And of course, individuals with Down syndrome dear to my heart because of my son. So I thought I'd share a little video, have a little singing to get things started, but hopefully in the process, be thinking about those students that we serve and so much more. So here we go. Now you're like, Sean, I want to see more. Well, it's hyperlinked to the presentation for today, and I'll have it also as an additional resource. Take a look at it at your leisure. And by the way, I did share in the note there. Feel free to contact me if you want to share any of this, but I ask you not to use it unless you okay it with me. All right, so with that said, let's kind of get started. And when we get started, when it thinks about literacy and technology, so many things can come to mind, but one of the things that comes to mind is the fact that, oh my goodness, there's so many tech tools out there. I've heard so many different things we can do with literacy, so many things we can do with reading. There's speech to text. There's so many other elements. And yes, there are. And so I thought we'd center things, not just simply on the technology. And then I don't think we should ever just simply go with the technology. Instead, we'll remember that movie Up with the balloon and the man with the house. And if you haven't seen it, it's awesome. I think it's a Pixar about 15 years ago. But there was that dog with squirrel. And to me, if we think of those technologies and start with the technologies, oftentimes it'll be that squirrel and squirrel and squirrel and squirrel. And it won't be the technologies our learners need. So instead, we're going to think of our friend Michael. And what would Michael say? And what would Michael do? And what is Michael reinforcing? And what is Michael telling us when it comes to that literacy? So let's get thinking about that. And of course, he's been reinforcing the fact that there are 5 essential components to reading, right? He's been talking about the fact that there is the phonemic or phonemic awareness. There's the phonics or the decoding. There's the vocabulary. There's the fluency. And comprehension, of course, is where we want to be. And there's all those elements that tie in together. And yes, in a way, they're all equal, but also they all have their own roles. And some individuals will have challenges in one area that will lead to challenges potentially in another area. But there's a host of things that fall into the area of reading. And so I want us to be thinking not so much about the technology initially. I want us to be reflecting about, well, what do we know about reading and that literacy and that Michael shared with us? And to do that, I'm going to ask us, if we would, and this is an activity I'm asking us to do for this week, is think about some of the challenges that you have been talking about with Michael, that you have been working with within your own environment, be it your classroom, be it within your building, be it within your diocese, be it within your archdiocese. But think of some of those challenges. And yes, I've given you a Padlet to just brainstorm about those. Brainstorm and give me at least 5 areas of challenge, reading challenges, and be as specific as you could. I've given you the bit.ly link, which will take you to a Padlet. I've given you the PDF, the QR code that will take you to the Padlet. And of course, the questions I want to ask of you are the following. So what are the reading challenges that you see in your students in your classroom or school? Be specific about what you see. Align the challenges to the big areas of writing if you want. Well, in the area of fluency, I see. In the area of comprehension, I see. Feel free to add how this is challenging or further frustrating the students you're working with, how this is challenging and offering barriers to what you're trying to do instructionally, and the list goes on. So I'll pause here for just a minute if you want to press the pause and go do this activity, and then come on back. So let me pause. I'll count to 5 to myself. For those of you that are coming back, welcome back. For those of you that basically waited with me for those 5, here we are. Let's move on. And so when you think about those areas of reading, a lot of different things come to mind. And I love this visual. And this visual, let's blow it up for you. This visual to me is phenomenal because it talks about dyslexia, but it talks about so many other elements beyond just reading. And reading is just one part. And yet, when I start looking at the different elements of dyslexia, when it comes to spelling, when it comes to listening, when it comes to writing, these are just one of many, many other areas that you'll find with individuals with learning disabilities and individuals with dyslexia. But to me, they intertwine, right? They overlap, they connect. And it's almost impossible to not have, I have slow phonological processes areas. I have difficulty with printing, but then I get over to taking notes. I have pronunciation difficulties. I struggle with background noise, which of course is going to have an impact on my reading, but also in terms of remembering words and difficulty in spelling. Well, that goes into my reading as well. It goes on and on and on in terms of literacy. But in addition to that, we know under the area of learning disabilities, so that a lot of the folks that you have been focusing on with Michael, we have language processing, we have phonological processing, we have visual spatial processing, we have processing speed, we have memory issues, we have executive function issues, and of course it gets into oral language, it gets into reading, writing, etc., etc., etc. So back to that Padlet that you haven't filled out yet. Hopefully I've given you a few ideas. For those that have filled out the Padlet, awesome. Here's our additional ideas to really think about when it comes to these challenges of reading. Now, in that, Michael has also walked you through and begun to walk you through, and you're further investigating what are effective ways to intervene, what are effective ways to teach about reading. And I know you've come across a number of these different ideas, and you've started to crosswalk some of these ideas in terms of this is a challenge, and this is how the solution is going to work, and this is how assessment, this is how data is going to be so key to not only identify the challenge, but also then to begin to monitor the progress as you continue to grow with that, which is awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay, all right. Well, Sean, you haven't talked about technology yet. You've been talking about those struggles that Michael talked about, and you're talking about these interventions. Are you going to give us a list of interventions? No, I'm not. But instead, what I want us to be thinking about is all that goodness, all the good things that Michael's been talking about in respect to the interventions, and we're going to crosswalk those to technology in just a moment. So, also, when we think about these practices, Michael's been reinforcing the ones that work, that are effective, that are evidence-based. And those are things I'm going to also crosswalk us over to technology as well. In addition, of course, we can take these processes, and this is one I'm not going to highlight yet. We'll talk about this in the spring. But if we took interventions and we took evidence-based practices and we added in technology, one intervention that pops up is something called the CAP intervention. And the CAP intervention takes what we know about multimedia learning, particularly video. It takes in the idea of what we know about pedagogical content knowledge, and it takes in what we know about vocabulary and interventions of teaching vocabulary. It wraps it all together and creates these videos. And these videos are meant to help teach about vocabulary, particularly vocabulary that's related to content material. So in a way, it's tied in the effective strategies with the evidence base, with the technology, and in and of itself, it's a new intervention. Now, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I want to do that crosswalk because I want you to appreciate what Michael's reinforced, what Michael's been telling you, what Michael's offered in terms of interventions, and then I want to have us thinking a little bit about technology as we go along. So, as we think about this technology, be thinking again about the language comprehension Michael's talked about the word recognition, about the skilled reading, and how they all intertwine. Now, I'm going to get into some technology solutions in just a moment, but think about the fact that our learners need that background knowledge. They need that vocabulary knowledge. They need a number of other things in terms of being able to facilitate that. We also know that from a trajectory perspective, and there's lots of different ways this has been visualized, but we know individuals that struggle with reading tend to be the flat line, tend to be that blue line on the first graphic or the yellow line on the other graphic. And the pink or the red in both of those graphics are the individuals that are successful readers or the ones that have those foundational skills when it comes to reading. So they're moving along trajectory-wise as you would expect a typically developing individual. And what we have on the blue line or the yellow line are those struggling readers or those without the foundational skills that are going to flatline on us. Now, the challenge is several things. What I want to emphasize with this graphic is the gap. That gap is significant. That gap is huge. And that gap is definitely represented in terms of the reading element. So for me, interventions, although they may be extremely powerful, interventions in and of themselves are not going to be enough to allow that individual to catch up to their typically developing peers, because they're on the bus or on the plane or on the train, and that's moving. And I already had this significant gap. How am I going to catch up, not only catch up to get on the plane or the train and move along with them, but catch up so I can actually get on the train or the plane or whatever I want to catch up to them on. So interventions are only going to go so far. So what I would argue is that we're also going to need about digital solutions, because some of our individuals are not going to get caught up and they still need access and appreciation to some of those elements of reading. So lots of different ways to be considered this way, but we do know if the students get exposure to reading elements, there's a lot that goes into that exposure to overall learning and test scores and a whole host of other contributing factors. Now, another component, and this is where I want to pivot over to the technology, is there's also another element, is we're going to go from learning to read to reading to learn. And that's going to happen between our second and third grade. So all these other elements, what Michael's talked to you about the challenges with reading, what you've shared with me via the Padlet, with the interventions that work, with the practices that align to it, with the challenges we have with the gaps within our individuals and how those gaps will continue to grow. I think you have to think about technology as part of your solution, because if you don't, those gaps are going to become more pronounced, the interventions won't be enough, and when we switch from learning to read to reading to learn, therefore, we're now left with the fact that, wait, I'm teaching you science based on your reading. I'm teaching you social studies based on your reading. I'm teaching you concepts of language arts based on your reading. I'm teaching you executive function skills and social emotional skills based on your ability to read. The list goes on. So if I'm not giving you some additional tool, and I have that significant gap that this slide's sharing, I'm putting you at a barrier, an obstacle, a significant component that will become a significant limitation for our learners. I know you're experiencing that day in, day out, because you're saying, well, of course, Sean, So let's get into some of these solutions. So what are some of the solutions? We've already identified the problem. What are some of the solutions? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break here, all right? But when we get back, I want to talk about some of these digital solutions that are representative of ideas and tools that we can begin to introduce and use in a variety of ways that then could open up access to the content and to the reading, but deliver it in a different way. So let's take a break, all right? And we'll get back and we'll talk about some of these digital solutions.